Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. David Childs of Northern Kentucky University. I am the Black Studies Director there and also Associate Professor of History, Social Studies Education, Black Studies. So glad to be here with you this morning. Um, Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Bowles, to Mr. Bowles and the Northern Kentucky NAACP. Glad to be here to talk about diversity in education. And I'm going to pull up my slide here. And you can see my title, Becoming More Culturally Competent Educators, Addressing Hidden Bias and Racial Trauma in Our Classroom. This kind of work is so important today, especially as a lot of the efforts for teaching diversity in the classroom has been under attack. And there's been a demonization of teaching African American history. It's Black History Month, the last few days of Black History Month, and the last day actually of Black History Month in 2023. Thank you also for just joining me virtually and allowing me the opportunity to be able to teach this lesson and bring you information that's part of my research. It's been a part of my research for a long time, but bringing it remotely and via this platform. As educators, one of our goals is to be competent, culturally competent in understanding diversity, understanding the kind of students we have in our classroom and how best to serve them. Because I want to remind us that education is all about the students. So often we make it about adults. We make it about our salaries, our careers. But when education goes well, the individuals that benefit the most are the students. Conversely, when education goes horribly wrong, it's the students that suffer. Culturally competent is a more focused and intentional thinking about diversity and difference in our classroom and how to best address those of different backgrounds, racially, socially, socioeconomically, gender, different backgrounds that we have, and different things we bring to the table, ethnicity. Then we're going to get a little bit into addressing hidden bias and the racial trauma that affects us even today, even students. So now I'm throwing up a scary word here, critical race theory. Critical race theory has, of course, been the wedge issue, the wedge term that's been misused in the political realm as a way of rallying people and getting them all up in arms about the scary so-called critical race theory that's going on in the elementary classrooms, middle school classrooms, and secondary classrooms. Now, I had critical race theory in my doctoral program, and so it's not what people think it is. Critical race theory is used to discuss all things diversity and all things anti-racist curriculum, and even 1619 Project has been called critical race theory. But critical race theory is its own specific thing. And it basically is a theoretical framework. We use it in grad school. One way of looking at the world and looking at the impact of race. And it started out looking at the impact of race on our laws, racism on our laws, and conversely, how does it affect our institutions? How does it affect our schools? How does systemic racism affect and influence our schools and policymaking? One aspect of critical race theory, one tenet of critical race theory is the power of storytelling. So I'm going to borrow from that today. The critical race theory highlights the power and the notion of storytelling. It comes out of jurisprudence when lawyers use storytelling to persuade an audience and help an audience understand better what the situation is. So I'm going to do that today. My story, it relates to this work as it relates to cultural competence, because I grew up in an urban setting. I grew up in an inner city as a child. Now, when I moved to middle school, when I was a little older, we had a chance my dad had he started a business, and he was able to have some mild success where we were able to move from an inner city to a working class neighborhood and have I don't know how else to put this, live to a safer neighborhood, because some aspects of my neighborhood was dangerous, but I was never in any danger. My dad just wanted to put us in a better environment so we could have better influences. But when we moved to the working class neighborhood, it was predominantly white, and we had to deal with racism. So it's sort of a trade off. But I went to an urban school where it was okay. In elementary, we didn't have a lot of resources, and that often impacted my own education. And there was not an expectation for us to do well coming out of that neighborhood. There were gangs, there was violence in my neighborhood before we moved, and but also I want to talk about the racial trauma. Even in the inner city neighborhood, I experienced racism from the few white students that went there, and then when I moved to the predominantly white neighborhood, I experienced it from teachers and other classmates and folks in the neighborhood, getting called the N word, and teachers telling me that I would not do well in school. Here I am, a college professor, and I had teachers misinforming me and misguiding me, telling me that I was not college material, that I could not do the work. And so I am a person that, you should make no mistake, unequivocally was impacted by racism in my schools. I had overt and covert racism, explicit and implicit and explicit racism that was perpetrated against me all through my career, all through my as a student, and then also from I've had several encounters with the police. I recently had an encounter with law enforcement just yesterday, actually, where I was pulled over and the officer made a mistake, and I was reaching for my wallet. I was nervous, to be honest. It was a mistaken identity. They pulled me over, and I was reaching for my wallet, and the officer was standing back from the car, and he yells at me and grabs his gun, his holster, puts his hand on his holster, his gun, and says, "Put your hands up! Don't move around like that." He's yelling at me, and I was so nervous. So I put my hand. I should have known. I put my hand on the dashboard like this, so I couldn't find my wallet. I was nervous that I left it at home and I wouldn't have my ID. And just like that, I could have been killed. He had his hand on his gun, is what I want to say. And I was nervous, and I had been through this before, maybe not quite like this. And he yelled, "Don't move around like that. Don't move around like that." And so I put my hand on the dashboard because that's what I was taught to do. And we got it all resolved. I was calm, and I got out of there safely. Here I am to do this lecture. So what am I saying? All of these things impact not only myself, but students of color that have to go through experience racism in the classroom. So just pulling back, understanding students with backgrounds similar to mine and from a variety of other diverse backgrounds is key to effective teaching and learning. So to get that, we have to go in. We can't teach curriculum as a one size fits all kind of thing. And there's this misinformation out there that says if you teach one way, that fits everything. And good teaching is good teaching, but teaching should be massaged and and changed and extracted and expanded, and we should scaffold. Teaching is a complex art, and so those teachers that use the same curriculum every year and do not change it, as a professor of education, that's bad teaching. We should think about who we have in our class. For example, I just spent some time in going through Oklahoma, which is one of my favorite states. I love driving. We were driving out to Texas, and we drove all the way through Oklahoma. And if you've been out there, it has the largest Native American population, or largest, I should say, reservations. The Choctaw Nation is there. Choctaw, and there's some Cherokee there, and the whole just about state is under the governance of the Choctaw Nation. And if I were to teach in the Choctaw Nation, I could not bring the same kinds of curricula that I teach here in the States, in the I used to teach in the suburbs. It's going to be different. I need to adjust it for our Native American brothers and sisters, trying to understand their culture. We have to have some cultural humility, y'all. A lot of times we're culturally arrogant because we're U.S. citizens and we think that we know best, but we have to slow down and understand students of different backgrounds. So let's get more into what culturally competent pedagogy is. You've heard this term before thrown around. I want to tell you these terms mean something very specific. Anti-racism is that's a whole different term. It's not culturally competent pedagogy. Critical race theory is not culturally competent pedagogy. We have to take the time to study what these things is, or don't use the terms. Don't assume we know because we've been in education for a long time or we've been in the business world for a long time. There's no substitute for doing your homework, the heavy lifting of doing research, real research, not just Googling a couple of things and pretending we're an expert because we have a college degree. I have a number of degrees. I've been blessed to be able to do well in education, but my degrees are in history, theology, education. I have some social theory, and I actually have some art degrees, fine art, but I don't have a degree in math. And so I shouldn't be pretending that I'm good at math because I have degrees. And I need to, if I want to learn advanced math and I want to teach advanced math, first of all, I have to learn it. Then I have to go get some credentialing. So I'm not going to pretend that I understand math because I have a master's degree. No, I need to humble myself. That's what I mean. Intellectual humility is a word that I got from Cinso and D'Angelo's text called "Is Everyone Really Equal?" I like that term. They talk about intellectual humility. Same thing with these things. If you don't know what culturally competent pedagogy is, if you hear words like anti-racism, you need to look it up and do research. And so we're going to talk specifically about culturally competent pedagogy. Cultural competence is the ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. That's pretty simple. Deal with people that are different from ourselves and do it intentionally and be willing to do that. Cultural competence encompasses being aware of, look at this, one's own worldview. So I'm aware of my own worldview and developing positive attitudes towards cultural differences. I'll give a somewhat controversial example. Some things that are controversial now, maybe not, didn't used to be. But I identify as a Christian. Now, I can't superimpose. I have Muslim students. I have students from different backgrounds, Hindu. I can't impose my ideas and my views on other people. I can retain my worldview. I don't have to change my worldview. But what I do have to do, especially as an educator, be open to listen and learn about other people. Just because you're learning about something doesn't mean that you adapt it. There are a lot of things in politics, in the political spectrum, that I learned that I vehemently disagree with, but I want to read up on it, see what folks are talking about. Same thing with cultural differences. Gaining knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews is so positive. It's a good thing. We need more of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this state. We're so divided. State of affairs. We're so divided in our country. Talking particularly the U.S. context. This is a graphic I wanted to bring to you. This is an older graphic from 1992, but it's very, very relevant. It's from Martin's text. Martin's text on Equity and Excellence, 1992. It's a model for studying the effects of social policy on education, gauging the impact of race, sex, and class diversity. And so this is a graphic that helps us understand institutional discrimination. A lot of times when we think about race and when we think about prejudice, we're in this circle here to the left. I don't know if you can see my arrow. Individual prejudice, the beliefs, attitudes, and opinions which reflect the cultural values, norms, and standards of the dominant culture transmitted to social institutions through interaction. So a lot of people, when they think about racism, they think about personally. I'm not racist. I don't treat anybody bad. I treat everybody the same. I'm colorblind, which is the notion of colorblind is sincere, but it doesn't work because we all see color. Just because we see color doesn't mean it's a bad thing. We've got to the point where we think talking about race and talking about difference is bad. It's not, because Also, when we omit somebody's culture and their ethnicity and who they are as a person, like I'm very proud to be African American. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm not afraid to talk about it. It's who I am. It's my identity. I'm still an American. It doesn't take away from my Americanness. My Americanness. I'm proud to be an American. I have had the blessing to travel abroad to various countries in Africa, Liberia, Gambia. Had a chance to go to France, Paris, and London. But one of the things I've developed from traveling is that I'm proud to be an American. The things we have here are so wonderful, and I had the opportunity to appreciate that when I travel abroad. But individual prejudice is not a prejudice shouldn't be just looked at as individual. But I want us to think about institutional discrimination, how institutions, not intentionally, but they're designed and set up to where certain people, like women, like the institution of the office of the presidency, is set up to where women can't. Right, at least now there's a barrier where women can't be president. There are other barriers like people protest the Oscars and things like that, and Academy Awards. There's so little diversity that is awarded. On and on and on. The college professorate, the small percentage of individuals that have earned tenure. I'm the first individual in the College of Education at North Kentucky University to earn tenure. Those are institutional barriers. Policies, practice. Look at what it says. The policies and practices and standard operating procedures that reflect the public's beliefs. So it reflects what the public believes, opinions and attitudes, which perpetuate the original cultural values, norms, and standards of the dominant culture. Okay, cultural bias. You see, so these all intersect. Okay, so cultural bias is the values, norms, and standards of the dominant culture, which reflect what is prized. And so, Hispanic culture is downplayed. Caucasian culture, European American culture is championed. Cultural humility. I talked about this. Is the ability to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other oriented. So you're thinking about others or open to others. You're open to people different from yourself. It's getting away from this idea that my culture is better, my ideas are better. You might appreciate what you're doing and the way you do it, but it's not always best. It's not always the best way. There are other ways of looking at it. But as it stands in our society, middle class white culture is privileged as the best way of doing things. But sometimes it's not the best way of doing things. In relation to aspects of cultural identity that are most important to a person. I really like this. This is the cultural iceberg, and this is basically saying that there's a lot more going on underneath the surface in terms of dealing with their various cultures and ethnicities than meets the eye. So at the top, when we think about different cultures, like probably a good example is Chinese. I was thinking about their food, think about flags, festivals like Cinco de Mayo and El Dia de los Muertos in Mexican culture. Think about fashion, holidays, music, the fun part, performance, dance, games, artifacts like Black culture. A lot of times during Black History Month, we'll celebrate jazz, blues, hip hop, African American art. But there are some deeper things in helping us as teachers, as educators, as business leaders, as the business community understand different cultures. Communication styles are so important. Notions of courtesy, manners, friendship, leadership, cleanliness, modesty, beauty. These things are harder to get at. You have to get to know a person to get to that point. Concepts of self, time, past, future. Like it's a Western standard to like be prompt and be on time. In like African culture, people trickle in. You know, I've gone to churches in Africa, and people. The difference is sometimes they'll commit all day to something. They don't have like five things to do at once. If they're going to church, they're going all day. And that's what we did too. I was worn out. And but people come in at various times. I mean, majority of the people get there on time, but there's people that trickle in all day. That's to be expected. It's very Western to be prompt, like boom, 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 boom. That's a capitalist Western idea. These are things that we can get at by getting to know a person, but it's underneath the surface, and it may not be apparent. Okay, apparent at first. Often educators encounter students from cultural or racial backgrounds different from their own. That's going to happen. You may be teaching in the context of, I gave Native American example. My wife teaches in the context of Hispanic culture. She has a lot of Mexican immigrants, Guatemalans, Dominicans. My wife's an educator, but fortunately, she's a Spanish educator. And she's, just as a side note, she's so fluent in the language. And she taught herself, but she did study in Mexico a few times. And they sometimes they will think that she's Hispanic, and that's super impressive to me because my Spanish could not get me out of any situation. But trying to learn from her. But you'll encounter different people. Embrace that. Don't be afraid. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid of what you don't know. Just acknowledge you don't know it and try to learn better. But I don't know is not a good enough excuse. Try to find out. It is essential that teachers understand their own biases. I think that's important. That's the hard thing. Like even as males, I have to understand my male patriarchalness, if that's a word, my male bias, and so understand. Then my privilege, my male privilege, and then my own privilege as a professor, as a middle class person. So we have to acknowledge that. Think about that as we're teaching. Acknowledge your own biases and connect with these students for effective education. Now I may skip around here. I see I got some material that I may not get into too much detail, but I like this graphic. The circle of awareness, blind spots. So some things we know. The blue part is, we may know, but then there's some unknowns, and then we get into our blind spots. We all have blind spots because sometimes we just don't know what we don't know as it relates to teaching. If you've never been working in an urban context, don't pretend that you know. And don't tell people of color what they should do and how they should feel. It's okay to ask, but don't. Part of the challenge is people of color has sometimes people have explain to them how they feel. Uh, they have words that may be kind of offensive, but like, well, no, it's not. Sometimes I'll give you an example with gender. Sometimes we mansplain. We explain to women how they should feel and what they should think. And there's a term that's called white-splaining, where sometimes white folks will explain to black people how they should feel and what they're going through, rather than asking. I call it going on a listening tour, listening to everybody, listening. And it's hard to do that because we're used to explaining things. Much of American U.S. educational practices and pedagogy are based on white middle class values and culture. I've said that already. It's not that those values are bad in and of themselves, because middle class values are presented as best. That's part of the problem. Best practices and superior to it creates blind spots as it relates to understanding other races and cultures in our schools and classrooms. Transform the curricula to be more inclusive, introducing more diverse literature, lessons from multiple perspectives is a great approach. James Banks' work on multicultural curriculum is helpful in this area. Steps in addressing our racial and cultural biases. So we've learned about thinking about our biases, recognizing our biases. Let's look at some practical steps. So first, stereotype replacement. I really like this. We have all these stereotypes about African Americans. Like when I was younger, I had cornrow braids. That's the braids going to the back. And I had baggy clothes. We used to wear baggy clothes in the 90s. But I was a smart kid. I was a smart kid. I understood more than people realize. But I got stereotyped often by the police, by my teachers. They assumed, how do they stereotype me? They assumed that I was not smart, that I was not intelligent. But not only that, took it a step further. They assumed that I was a criminal. And so, or you might see a Hispanic child that speaks, their language is not fluent in terms of they don't speak good English, I should say. I hate to even say that, but yeah, they're not fluent in English, and that's no reflection on their intelligence. They could be a completely brilliant person. They just Spanish is their first language. So let's think about how we can replace stereotypes positively. Or when we see an African American woman, don't assume that she's violent and angry and ignorant and all these kinds of things. So counter stereotyping is related. So replace um, our negative notions with positive notions. Black people killed by police or white vigilantes. You see here People stereotype these individuals, and they lost their lives. Um, Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Eric Garner. These are all people killed by the hands of law enforcement because people had a certain perception about Black folks, and unfortunately, that they deserve to die. Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Arbery, they did something so heinous, or they didn't do. In Trayvon Martin's case, he had a pack of Skittles, and that's true. He had a pack of Skittles, but he had a hoodie on, and people had a certain perception about him. I know that from personal experience. People have stereotyped me. Even recently, yesterday, I said somebody's the officer looked, and I saw him look in the car. He saw it was a black male, and he got tense. He said, "Let me see your hands," And it scared me. It scared me. Individuation. Look at people as individuals. Look at these beautiful people. Of course, these are probably models or something. It's hard to believe these are just random students, but man, maybe they are. Maybe they walk around looking fabulous all day, but they're individuals. Let's look at them as individuals and not as a monolith of thugs and criminals, or you know, maybe you've had some bad experiences with black folks or white folks or Mexicans or Chinese, but that's no reflection on the whole race. I think that sometimes tanks how we view people. Look at it from another perspective. But I started doing this when I taught in the inner city school. I started making myself look at these children just as children, as babies. And I started putting myself back when I was 17, 16, the struggles I had. I just wanted to wake up, have something to eat, go to school, have a good time, learn something. I always wanted to learn. I was excited about learning. And I don't like when teachers say they just don't want to learn. They want Fs. Nobody wants an F. Nobody enjoys. And nobody wakes up and say, "I don't want to learn anything else. I want an F." That's a cop out. They may respond in a negative way in your classroom or in somebody else's classroom, but let's take their perspective and put yourself in their shoes and see them as human. Let's humanize them. Let's humanize students, no matter what their background is. I like this perspective taken related to race and culture. Try to see things from my point of view. Sometimes we're so high and mighty, and we don't have cultural humility. We're culturally superior, and we try to get people to look at things from our perspective. But let's look at it from their perspective. This may be difficult, but this is probably one of the most important. Increase opportunities for contact. Increase your opportunities to be around people that are different from you, and connect with people different backgrounds, and this will break down a lot of the stereotypes. Get to know me. If you don't have any, we call it cultural friends at my university. There's a lot of for example, white women that I've befriended at work, and we just explain things to each other, and we try to look at things from each other's perspective. I've never been a white woman. I'm actually married to an African American woman, and so they help me. And we'll be honest. We ask honest conversations, and some will say, "Well, let's have our children play together." What have you. That's the best way. As I said, I'm a religious person, so I get to do this. I get to cheat because I do a lot at church. I can go to diverse churches, um, and maybe everybody doesn't have that option, but I go to predominantly white churches and interact and learn from those individuals. So I talked about my story already. 3 things we can do in the classroom to address racial trauma, and I'm going to begin to wrap this up. What are trauma and childhood traumatic stress? A lot of individuals, and myself, I had a lot of racial trauma. So we have to first recognize it. I had a lot of negative encounters with the police force when I was 17. I was coming back from my job. I worked at the mall back when malls were more popular. I worked at Subway, and I was apprehended by the police because some person had accused me of breaking in somebody's car. My mom was so worried about me because I was supposed to be at home from work by then, and they apprehended me. Now I didn't have to doing the jail time, but I was afraid. I was a child. Again, perspective taking. I might have been even 16. No, I was 17. Historical trauma is the effects of racism, racial discrimination, enslavement, um, the Jim Crow laws, the discrimination in the South and North. Segregated facilities didn't just happen in the South; it happened in the North as well, and how that impacts us today. How attitudes in police departments that have come from old vestiges of how police have treated people historically. Now, I'm not saying officers are bad across the board. We had an event yesterday, and my good friend, the officer, came and support. We brought in a national celebrity to do some historical to talk about African American history, and the officers were beautiful. So I'm not saying we need law enforcement. Thank God for law enforcement. But there's a historic racism, discrimination that has been interwoven into the way we do policing. That's historical trauma. How does that affect the classroom in terms of people's students' encounters about race and discrimination? How does how they're treated in the classroom? How we do education? How does that affect students? Myself, when I was told I couldn't go to college, I wouldn't be able to go to college based on the color of my skin, or people from my neighborhood, how Black people, they thought I would perform. We talked about this already. It's important for educators just to understand that people have different sets of experiences, and they bring that to the classroom. Okay, keep that in mind. The effects of it, or the effect. And I'm not gonna go into it by age group, but I'll just make some general statements. They can affect students' processing and how they receive education, how they perceive education. A lot of times, their parents had negative experiences as a Hispanic woman, as a Chinese woman, as a Native American woman. They've had negative experiences when they were in school, and so that's superimposed upon their students, their children, I should say. Educators can be more aware. We've talked about this already. Just be more aware, be more intentional. Practice intellectual humility. Okay, and these are some resources. I want to show you one more resource, and then I'm going to close out. There's a resource that I think is really exciting called Democracy in Me, and it's a project I curate for our local NPR station. It's an NPR project, Cincinnati Public Radio, and they have a project again called Democracy in Me. You might have heard of it, and it is a number of resources. There are 100 and some odd articles, maybe almost 200 articles, 180. We've been doing this project for about 3 years, and they're short articles. This is one I did recently that I've written. I have students help me sometimes come and write articles. They're following us. The fear of driving while Black, and I just experienced this yesterday, and I just give a narration of my own experience. Then I go into some of the information in terms of white privilege and what that's all about, systemic racism, and there are links you can click. This is a good website, the Teaching Tolerance website. I think it may be called something different now. Yeah, Learning for Justice, and it's a great resource for what we're talking about. But folks, there's a ton of articles. The Democracy in Me, what we did, we wanted to write about civic education. We do a lot of stuff on diversity and inclusion as it relates to education, or in general, African American education, history, so all kinds of information and resources. This was a fun one I did, and I'm doing a larger article on this. That's really taking too long. I got to get it done on Black cowboys, and going back and looking at some of the history and undoing some of the wrong things that were taught, and or in this case, adding to it. You know, all cowboys were not white. Like 20%, they say, some scholars say, of cowboys were Black and brown. So this is an article on Black cowboys. Now, this is what I wanted to show you, all these resources here. So that's all I have today. We're going to just let me put my email address up for anybody that might have any questions, because this work for me is my life's work. And a big part of what I like to do is share resources with the community. with my colleagues. I think I put my email address here at the beginning. I'm going to go back there. Nope. Go to another slide here. Just bear with me. While I'm finding it, Childs D1 at NKU.edu, Childs D1 at NKU.edu. And you can please feel free to reach out to me and call me or, oh, here we go. I found it. I'll pull this up. That way I don't have to keep talking and explaining. And there's my information. And thank you so much for, again, Mr. Bowles, and for allowing us this opportunity. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.